Hey, walk a mile in my shoes. Why don't you? It's episode 24 of For Our Edification. Thank you for joining this episode of For Our Edification. I'm Eddie Francis. For Our Edification is a show where we try to answer the question, what's that like? And so go to eddiefrancis.com, check out past episodes of For Our Edification, and you can get the show where you get most of your podcasts. Higher education marketing sounds like a lot of fun, right? You go in, and with one single billboard, you're going to change the lives of so many students. Yeah. Well, let me tell you what's happened. In the past few years in higher ed marketing, there has been this explosion of higher ed marketing podcasts. And I've been listening to these things, and I have been saying, yes, that is exactly right. Somebody can understand what I'm going through in my role. And so I thought I would reach out to one of the folks who hosts one of these podcasts. His name is Joel Goodman. He's the co-host of Thought Feeder, and pretty interesting. We planned for this to be one episode, but the interview got so good that we had to make it two. Welcome to part one of this episode of For Our Edification. The views and opinions expressed on For Our Edification do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the hosts, guests, or any entities with which we are affiliated. So one day, I get something very cool in the mail. It just happens to be this campfire cup. And if you're listening to this campfire cup is like a navy blue with this, what shade of green is this? Is this a...
It's like I don't know. It's like a lime green, but it's
like
a little
lime
paler
green
than that. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And so this campfire cup says, I probably said something that I shouldn't have on Thought Feeder. I was a guest on this podcast, and that is true. I find not only is it true in my situation, but a lot of other situations where I'm listening to guests and I'm going, oh man, do they really want to say that? Did they mean to say that? And Joel, this is one of my favorite lines from guests on Thought Feeder. I probably shouldn't say this, but
Yeah.
and then they will say it.
A common refrain.
A common refrain. So the co-host of Thought Feeder is Joel Goodman, or I should say it was Joel Goodman, because Thought Feeder did his final episode, and his co-host was our episode 23 guest, John Stephen Stansel. Joel is the principal and CEO of Bravery Media, a higher education website design and digital strategy agency. Happy to have him on this episode of For Our Edification. And like I said, Joel and JS, they did their final episode of Thought Feeder, but you can still check it out at thoughtfeederpod.com, especially episode 19. You got to check that one out.
That's definitely the best one.
That guest was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I've never heard anything like it in my life. Hey, man, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Eddie. I'm really it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and super excited to be on your show. And I don't know if it's returning the favor or just to be flattered at the same time, but thanks for having me on.
No. So here's the thing. So I would listen to episodes of Thought Feeder, and there were quite a few guests when I would hear them talk about some of the aspects of the work that they do in higher ed marketing. I would feel seen.
Yeah.
Would feel so seen by them. It was really interesting to hear people share some of the same frustrations that I have when it comes to the higher ed marketing landscape. And one of the things that I seem to pick up from a few people on your podcast, and then other podcasts as well that focus on higher ed marketing, a lot of us seem to deal with kind of the just shuttle up and dribble treatment on our campuses.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, just promote this. That's all we need you to do. Just go ahead and tweet this 25 times before tomorrow so people can come to my event. So that's the kind of stuff that we would deal with. So
totally.
So let's start at the beginning. What motivated you and JS to even start Thought Feeder?
Yeah, so it was I guess it was about 3 years ago. It was actually right before the COVID pandemic really hit, right before lockdowns happened. I can't remember if it was before we had heard news of this scary, sickness coming to the shores of the United States or not, but um I think JS and I had just like been a little bit bored with everything else that we were doing, and we wanted uh he was tweeting a lot of hot takes, and we wanted to we were annoyed with the amount of hot takes that were coming out that weren't really thought through. And so we wanted to kind of have a show that allowed us to talk candidly and um at the same time helpfully about the problems that do face higher ed, the stuff like all the topics that kind of get pushed to the back, or that people that work especially in higher ed Marcom offices, there's kind of a common group of ideas that float among everyone, and a common group of frustrations, and a lot of times they just don't get talked about. And the problem is that in that kind of middle level of staffing, if it doesn't get talked about, leadership doesn't hear about it, and so change doesn't happen. And that was a time going into the pandemic, and then we saw it in like really hit in the pandemic as we started really getting in, kicking into high gear with the thought feeder episodes. Just burnout hit everyone all at the same time, and it was just really accelerated by the stressors caused by a completely unknown situation for most people in Marcom offices. And thought feeder was a way for us to show that sometimes John Stevens' hot takes or my hot takes weren't really hot. Like, they sounded hot, but we had actually thought through them. We knew what we were just like spouting off opinions. Like, they were opinions that we had thought for weeks about and had conversations about, and had actually formed some semblance of expertise within that certain topic. And then, part of that was we realized the two of us couldn't just be the ones that were talking to each other all the time. Although I do like those episodes where it's just me and JS going off on something. We need to have other voices in. I think we kind of hit the interview show not as early as you, Eddie, because you had this podcast going for a little bit longer than we did, I think. And we hit the interview show thing a little bit earlier in higher ed, and now there's so many interview podcasts in for higher ed marketers, and they're all great. But we wanted to figure out how to do that a little bit differently too, and so we wanted a mix of people that were in higher ed that could kind of work through those frustrations with us on the show, and then people that were outside of higher ed that we could learn things from in our daily jobs. And so a lot of the mix of guests that we've had on Thought Feeder over the last few years are people that work in tons of other industries. We had a good friend of mine who sadly we lost this week, came from a quick service restaurant background, and the things that you could learn from digital marketing within those sorts of practices and apply back to higher ed are things that we often don't hear in our kind of bubble. Or, and a lot of times, like when you work on a campus, you hear that, oh yeah, I got the campus bubble, right? We're kind of like insulated from everything outside of it. And it's very true, even in our professional circles. So we wanted to bring those ideas in and talk through them and think about how you could apply things like quick service restaurant marketing, or political marketing, or these different areas that sit outside of higher ed, to the practices that we have, and hopefully make everyone a little better in their jobs, but also like you were saying, like have them get to a point where they could connect and resonate with a lot of the topics that we were kind of talking about with our guests.
Yeah, and I think the other reason I wanted to talk to you specifically is I hold the work that we do in higher ed marketing in very high regard, because one of the things that people always forget about specifically about the marketing side, and some people just don't know, is that it's a business function. And so how do you get this business function, higher ed marketing, to work with the other business functions of higher ed to make sure the students get the quality of service that they actually deserve for the amount of money that they're paying for the experience, And so even when you and JS had episodes when you talked to each other, there were things that you would talk about that would seem so minor to other people, but it was really big in our world. And so I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was important to capture that. So So as you and JS would interview these higher ed marketers, what did you recognize as some of the challenges and the victories that we have in our campus communities in higher ed marketing?
Yeah, I think the real common kind of challenge is everywhere in higher ed is underfunding. And I don't think people said that specifically. I think it's framed a lot of times for us because I think because we do sort of missional work, right? Like we're tied to this larger impact that the institution's having.
Yeah,
the We frame it a lot of times in terms of being overworked and not being underfunded, but the reality is that those are two sides of the same coin, right? Like you're going to be overworked, but you're overworked because you're underfunded. If there was enough funding going into the marketing practices that we had in have in higher ed, we wouldn't feel as overworked because we would have the staffing support to help out, or we would be
exactly.
buying the right marketing tech, or we would like all of those sorts of things. So I think that's one of the biggest, it's one of the oldest challenges in higher ed marketing, and I think still increasingly one of the biggest challenges, and it's only going to get harder. Like, the if funding levels for marketing stay the same or are just marginally increased, that's not helpful. Like
Right.
and the work that we do every day as marketers gets more intricate, it gets more complicated, there are more pressures, it gets more fragmented, and we're still expected to operate in the same ways and hit the same marketing goals without any additional expansion to staffing or expansion to budgets that we can apply towards other strategic outcomes for what we want to do. So I think that's kind of the biggest common refrain. I think on the victory side, in higher ed in particular, I think we're kind of a special breed of people because, and I probably have said this on Thought Feeder over the years, but I think we buy into that vision of a larger impact that our institutions are having. And
Yeah.
so when there are wins, when we see that the institution has made an impact on students, or even like, if you work on a campus and you get that maybe it's a communications and marketing student at your school that comes in as a student worker in your office, when they really get it and you see that passion in them, that feels really good, and it
Yeah.
kind of spurs
Yeah.
you on to do more. So I think it's the challenges that we see in higher ed could beat down higher ed marketers. And I think, burnout is something that happens, but on the flip side of that, we really do see that we can be driven by that missional aspect and find little victories here and there, whether it's that really good interaction that's happening on social media. And, we talked a lot about social media on Thought Feeder because that's kind of JS's wheelhouse, or
Mhm.
when you see that your website is really performing to the level that you want it to, or you do a really good marketing campaign, you see it resonating out in the world, being able to turn back and say, okay, that was a win, and that was a good win for not just me, but for my team and also for the institution. I think that gives a bigger lift to higher ed marketers than you might see with, the typical, company man sort of person that's out there working for a corporation. It's like, yeah, big corporation, like, cool, we had a win. Like, do I get a bonus? Like, that sort of thing. Like, we don't see that in higher ed very often, but I think we feel that bigger camaraderie, and so the victories are a little bit more potent, I think, when we actually recognize them.
Yeah, it's the common lament I have heard from everybody who has left higher ed marketing is they hate it. Well, no, from people who have left campuses.
Sure.
The common lament I've heard, and actually JS said it on my last episode, is I really didn't want to go
Yeah.
because I really enjoyed it. And it is because when, it's commencement time and you see these students getting their degrees. But then when you see alumni who come back
Right.
and they talk about what the university did for them, especially when they said, I'm so proud of my university because I've been following it on social media and look at the work you've been doing. I
Right.
can't believe we look so good.
Yeah.
Um, that gives you it gives you motivation. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of higher ed marketers, at least the folks who are on campus, the campus marketers, I think for them though, it only buys like another 24 hours to 2 weeks of
Right.
energy.
Well, and
Because
Eddie, I think part of that you were saying a few minutes ago, you're talking about how, we don't really see these connections across business functions within the institution as closely. And I think that's a big part of it, is that as marketers, like, our work could be viewed as just a business function, but as higher ed devotees for our careers and vocations, like, we want to really understand that connection that happens with our alumni and with our current students.
yeah.
And I'm so sick of this term, because I've heard it for the last 16 years of working in higher ed, but all the various silos that we have around campus, all these walls that we hit when we just want to, like, make a connection with someone and see how our work can help them do their work better, and how their work can give us a feedback loop so that we can do our work better. It's very difficult to as you said, like, kind of prolong that energy and that boost that you get when you don't really have an opportunity to see the whole picture, all the connections across campus. I would chalk that up to another challenge in higher ed, and one that is surprising hasn't been figured out in 150 plus years of having similar structures and in on our campuses and staffing models like that. It's a thing that makes us not better, like that kind of, oh, we're going to own our business practice and we're not going to share it with someone else. We're not going to let the enrollment management folks know. Like, been talking about life cycle management in this industry for years and years and years and years, but we haven't done anything structurally to change that. And it's I don't think we're better for it. I think it really hurts how effective marketers can be. It hurts how effective your development folks can be. It hurts how effective even your faculty can be when you don't have those feedback loops, or when you can't apply what you're learning on the marketing side to the student experience side, which then helps you, foster these alumni that are going to give back when they're able to, because they've had such a good experience and have developed an actual affinity with the school. You only get a few of those, and it makes the social media manager's job harder, or the marketer's job harder, because they have to get through whatever baggage happened when the student was on campus, just to get them to that point where they're now a donor, or they're reconnecting with your brand and with your messaging.
You're listening to For Our Edification, and we're talking to Joel Goodman. He is the principal and CEO of Bravery Media, also co-host of Thought Feeder, which is a podcast that he and JS, they've done the last episode, but you can still catch those episodes at thoughtfeederpod.com. So let me talk about something that I'm going to bring everybody into my world for a second. Okay. So I'm sitting in a meeting, and everybody's having whatever conversation they're having, and there's this phrase that Terry Flannery, who's known as just one of the she's I call her the fairy godmother of higher ed marketing, and Terry has this thing that she says that really describes how people see our roles. She says people see higher ed marketing as the caboose. Everything happens, they make all the business decisions, and then they go to marketing. And then, to go with something I always say, they come to marketing and they see us as the arts and crafts shop, and so we have to go and make whatever decision was made pretty, regardless of how senseless the decision is sometimes. And so one of those things is the website, the college website, man. I'm sitting in a meeting, we're having a great conversation, and then all of a sudden, inevitably, in every single meeting, it comes up, we got to do something about the website. Oh, the website is so awful. Oh, the website is. And I'll go look at other websites, and I'm thinking, well, our website isn't all that bad. From where you sit, for the work that you do with Bravery, why is this such a difficult conversation from campus to campus? What have you heard that the people on the campuses we're not hearing ourselves?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges with the website are kind of internal relational challenges. I think a big one is knowledge competition. Like everyone within higher ed thinks they do everyone else's job and they know how to do everyone else's job.
Oh wow, so
And
that's not
so
limited to just Marcom. I mean, this just everybody. I can see
everyone,
that because development folks get the same thing.
sure.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. It's like, why
and
don't you just go to so and so, the rich alum, and just get the money from them?
right.
And it's not that simple.
And marketing folks think they know how professors should be teaching, and I mean, sometimes that's true, but as a marketer I have to say that because like sometimes maybe not how they should be teaching but what they should be teaching. I
Oh
think
yeah, I don't even know. I don't touch the professors.
right,
Just like,
right.
yeah, but
So
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah,
there's a business case to look at the market and figure out like what offerings we should have, but
yeah,
then that gets pushed out to, that usually gets pushed out to academic affairs, and so, and that's fine. But back to that siloing thing, like they're not really talking with marketing about it, they're doing their own thing, and then
yeah.
because they've hired their own consultants, they now know more than marketing does, even though marketing should have been in the conversation with that anyway, in the same way that alumni relations should have been, because maybe they could have been out soliciting donors for funding for these new programs or for whatever else. So everyone goes off and does their own thing at different times, and then they come back thinking that they're an expert in whatever this thing is that needs to happen. Website doesn't escape that. Everyone, you sit in those meetings and you hear everyone has an idea about what the website should be. And this is particularly obvious when you get new leadership in place, because a lot of times the website becomes a vanity project for them. It's, hey, I'm brand new, I got to make a splash, like I got to show that I know what I'm talking about, and you know how to do that, let's redesign the website. But they're not redesigning the website with prospective students in mind or with enrollment in mind. Like they say they are, but really they're thinking, how do I make myself look good in this new role, so that people like me and trust, so that I can go on and get my next role, afterwards. It's at that level, you're not necessarily looking to stick around for a super long time. And that's a hard place to be for those of us that actually are experts at the website, like know what the website could do and can do.
Yeah.
And so that knowledge competition that happens in these meetings ends up meaning that your website can't ever do the thing it's meant to do, because it's doing 1,000 things, right? Everyone has their pet project that needs to happen on the website. We need to have news stories on the homepage, and we need to have this giving appeal on the homepage, and all this stuff on the homepage, when the homepage, if it's really your front door to your institution, and the number one thing that you need, which, in the case of most colleges and universities, the number one thing they need is more enrollment. You should be targeting the people that can become students, not anyone else, right? And so there's data that you could go in and look at. You could do some research and figure out, what do those prospective students want? They don't want to read your news stories, I promise. They just don't. They're not at that point. They want to know, do you offer the program that I want? And if you do, how much does it cost? And then when they jump those hurdles, they can get into figuring out the cultural aspects of your institution, and if they're going to fit well in, that day-to-day routine and the ethos of what your campus does. News stories don't do that. As much as I hate to say it these days, student spotlights don't do that. Everyone wants to put a student spotlight, and it was a big topic in higher ed marketing for a long time. We got to have more student stories on the site. Problem is, put a student story on the site, and then you don't link back to the program that student was in, and what does it do? People are not coming just to be informed about your school. They're coming to take an action and figure out, can I check this thing off my list, and then take, then further that exploration part. So that's a big part of it. I think, again, underfunding is one of those things that everyone is aware of. No one wants to talk about, at least not openly. The website is for everyone at this point. I don't think there's any question about it. The website is the number one recruitment tool. It's the number one marketing tool for any institution. You are multi-million-dollar brands. Why are you not putting money into your website? Like, you think about other multi-million-dollar brands outside of our industry, like they put every year $2 to $3 to $5 to more than that $1 million into their website. And that's for building, that's for maintenance, that's for
Mm-hmm.
marketing, tech, that's for staffing to support it.
Yeah.
And we sit here and might put $250,000 into it every 5 years, and then staff it with a ghost staff that can't actually maintain it, and expect that website to continue performing for
Yeah.
a long time. Because man, $250, that's $250,000 is a whole lot of money. You know, $500,000 is a whole lot of money. It is a lot of money. But when you think about it in relation, and this goes back to like not having that business function connection, right? When you go back and you think about how many students you need to attract with that website to break even, if you're going and working with an agency like Bravery Media, or like, you know, a number of the other great agencies in higher ed, you might pay $300,000, $500,000 for a website redesign.
Yeah.
You know how many students you need to get in? Like 5, 6.
Exactly. Yeah.
That website needs to contribute to 5 or 6 additional students each year, or that year, if you're only going to do it once, like that year, for you to break even and get your money back. And it's going to do a lot more than that. And if you had the staffing to actually run a website at an optimized pace every year, like you were looking at the data, the usability studies, you were updating your content based on what people are reading, you're fixing your site speed, your SEO, like doing all that, actually investing in the right staffing to do that, or investing in the right partner to come along and help you with that. I mean, you're increasing that number every year. And so you're not just breaking even, you're actually like coming out way net positive. But instead, we think we can just set up a structure and let it run, and that a website's just going to go. And it's older staffing models. You know, we're still staffing websites the way that we did 15 years ago, or, you know, like the website of the marketing office like we did 15 years ago. And the web has changed a whole lot. The types of people have changed a whole lot. The technology has changed a whole lot. The tactics have changed a whole lot. And that's you're just kind of limiting the potential of what your most important marketing tool can do. And then the pressure goes on to your social media managers, or goes on to, you know, the people in like doing your print magazine and view books and things like that, who are like, we're seeing declines in reach. Like, why do we have to like pick up the slack when that money should be going into, you know, digital marketing or smarter, more strategic ways of marketing for the institution? It's a complicated deal, because higher ed is traditionally so bureaucratic and has so many levels, and has so many people that think they know marketing when they're not marketers, or, you know, think they know fundraising when they're not fundraisers. And it's just a lot of ego at times. And so, you know, as a primarily not-for-profit industry, like, we should quit that. Like, let's stop having the egos. Let's just do this in the right way, and try to build up the actual institution, versus trying to hang on to our own pet projects.
So that last answer, okay, so you gave me a lot to chew on there. Is it fair though? Let me ask you this: is it fair to say, okay, this is our strategic plan? Because I've been in this spot before, where I've said, hey, this is our strategic plan as an institution. Let's talk about what we want the website to do based on our strategic plan. Many thanks to Joel Goodman for joining me on part 1 of this edition of 4-Hour Edification. If you want to listen to those episodes of Thought Feeder, by all means, please do so. Go to thoughtfeederpod.com and find out more about Joel's work with Bravery Media by going to bravery.co. That's bravery.co. Check out the 4-Hour Edification page at eddiefrancis.com. You can keep your eyes peeled for part 2 of this interview. And you can also download past episodes. Please, by all means, rate the episodes, give me some feedback, tell me what you think, and also share it with friends. For Dr. Halim Malik Francis, I'm Eddie Francis. I'm going to see you in just a little bit for part 2. Thank you for checking out this edition of 4-Hour Edification.